and welcome to the first full book review of 2025 on Being Bookish. I really hope that you enjoyed the two author interviews that I aired in January. They are both really talented writers, and the books are ones I would heartily recommend you pick up, no matter what genres you tend to favour. By the time you listen to this, we'll already be a couple of weeks into February, though I can barely believe it. And next week, I will be celebrating another birthday. Wow, they certainly tend to come around so quickly, and that much quicker when you get older. That's such a scary thought. I don't even want to think about it. Anyway, you're not here to listen to me pondering the passing of time, so let's get down to it. Here I am, no spoilers, as opinion-filled as ever and ready to roll, all of which means it's time for the latest episode of Being Bookish. This week I am going to be travelling to Avelia via a strange silver portal in Zilverin to take part in a war between vampires, fae, and several crooked monarchs. If you hadn't already guessed it from the description, then here you go. I'm talking about Quicksilver by Callie Hart. I know, seriously, it is another fantasy, but I have just finished it as I write this at the beginning of the year and thought you might want to hear about Sare-iss and Kingfisher. I'm your host, Ray, self-confessed bookworm, introvert, hermit, and long-term depression sufferer. Join me on my journey through my ever-growing to-be-read pile and enjoy the latest of my 100% spoiler-free book reviews. Last year was definitely the year of fantasy, and though I did start 2025 by reading Booker Prize winner Orbital by Samantha Harvey, a wonderfully lyrical read that was good entertainment for a quiet New Year's Day evening, I have stepped right back on the train for my first full review. Sare-iss Fane is good at keeping secrets. No one knows about the powers she possesses or the fact that she has been stealing from the Undying Queen's reservoirs for as long as she can remember. But a secret is like a knot. Sooner or later, it is bound to come undone. When Sare-iss comes face to face with Death himself, she inadvertently reopens a gateway between realms and is transported to Avelia, a land of ice and snow. The Fae have always been the stuff of myth, of legend, of nightmares, but it turns out they're real, and Sare-iss has landed in the centre of a centuries-long conflict that might just get her killed. The first of her kind to enter Avelia in over 1,000 years, Sare-iss mistakenly binds herself to Kingfisher, a handsome Fae warrior with an agenda of his own. He will use her powers to protect his people, no matter what it costs him or her. Death has a name. It is Kingfisher of the Aegean Gate. His past is murky, his attitude stinks, and he's the only way Sare-iss is going to make it home. What a way to start the new year with another chunky fantasy. Sare-iss Fane isn't someone who stands back and watches when she is sure she can do something about it, which is how she finds herself in a battle with the Undying Queen Madra's guards. Knowing the risk she is taking, she lies to them, and after distracting Harren, the Queen's favourite, she steals a guardian gauntlet and flees, climbing over a wall into the 3rd District. She is determined that this gauntlet will help her to save her younger brother Hayden. It represents the possibility of a new life for him, away from the poor decisions he keeps on making. An inherent gambler, Hayden can't seem to stay away from the bad influence of Carrion Swift, a man Sare-iss is somewhat familiar with herself. However, her escape is only the beginning of a tumultuous series of events that will test her resilience and determination. When she's turned away from the forge by her mentor Elroy, who tells her to give the gauntlet back, she knows that she needs to figure out her next move. But then the Guardians arrive in the town, and she has to sacrifice herself in order to save a misguided Hayden. Dragged before the Queen, who is furious at the gall of a young girl from the disease-filled 3rd District, Sare-iss is sentenced to die at the hands of Harren, who is still angry with this young nobody for humiliating him and his well-trained soldiers. Sare-iss isn't going to go down easily, and though she is stabbed and hoisted on Harren's sword, she fights back and does plenty of damage before reaching for a sword above a solid silver pool that has started to shimmer and move. Despite being warned repeatedly not to touch the weapon that is calling to her, she pulls it from the wall and wields it, protecting herself even as her lifeblood is draining from her many wounds. And then a man erupts from the silver pool, looking like death himself. The next thing Sare-iss knows, she wakes in an unfamiliar bed, surrounded by fae, which must surely be a dream because they are myth, legend, a tale that parents tell their children to get them to behave. Fully conscious and her wounds healed, Sare-iss finds herself in the throne room of King Bellicon of Evalia, who is happy to have an alchemist in his presence, though he is dismissive of her status as a human. Things in the throne room are tense, though, as another is brought in, seemingly insane and out of control. It is him, her saviour, Death. And this is the first time Sare-iss and Kingfisher meet when both are capable of speech. Bellicon is keen to end Kingfisher, but it is his daughter Evelane's pleading that persuades him otherwise, though reluctantly. The moment in the throne room is what sets the scene for the rest of the book. Kingfisher is clearly intrigued by Sare-iss, and she is confused by this man who seems so unstable and terrifying. She has been presented with information about herself that she was previously unaware of, and as well as having to process this revelation, she is faced with this male fae who angers and intrigues her in equal measure. Of course, Kingfisher, or Fisher to his friends, wants something from Sare-iss. He needs her to create protective rings from Quicksilver to protect his army. But there's a price and he will have to pay it. She wants him to save her brother Hayden and bring him to Evalia. Transported with Kingfisher's mysterious shadow magic, Sare-iss finds herself surrounded by fae who are intrigued by her and admiring of her power, barring one female warrior who is angry with her purely because she's not cowed by the fae's strength. When Kingfisher returns from the 3rd District with Carrion Swift rather than her brother, she's furious and worried. What is going to happen to Hayden if she is unable to protect him? For all that he could be just as capable as she is, he isn't. He is weak, easily influenced and quick to anger, as was proved when he thought he was trying to save his far more capable sister from the wrath of the merciless queen. Fisher is constantly testing Sare-iss, doubting her abilities and her power to control the Quicksilver that is vital to help protect his people. This persistence infuriates Sare-iss, leading to multiple confrontations between the two, neither of whom is willing to give an inch. All the while, everyone around them seems to find it amusing, as it's obvious that this tension is based on far more than anger and irritation. When Fisher shows Sare-iss the forge for the first time, again questioning her familiarity with the tools required to carry out the creation of the protective rings, they encounter a vicious winter fox. A fox that eventually becomes Sare-iss' loyal companion, Onyx. Sare-iss is eternally angry at Fisher, but they are bound by a blood oath, and this fuels her fury further when he is able to control her actions with a simple word, though anyone would be livid if they were controlled by someone who doesn't seem to care about their feelings. What she doesn't realise is that Fisher has her best interests at heart. He's just not very good at voicing them. He was trapped alone in a maze for over 100 years, and his return is treated with a combination of joy and fear by people who either believed he had abandoned them or been imprisoned for all this time. For what is 120 years to a race of people who can live for thousands? While Sare-iss is struggling to control the Quicksilver and Fisher is battling to keep the Fey vampires from his home, things come to a head between the two, and their anger and frustration envelope them, though it's an explosion of lust that consumes them, not blood and rage and death. With what happened between them simmering beneath the surface of every secondary exchange, they continue with their goals. Sare-iss has created bonds with some of Fisher's chief warriors, Loreth and Ren, both of whom have served and followed him loyally for hundreds of years, while Quicksilver seems to be desperate to keep out of her way. They can all sense that the end is coming. The vampires from across the ice are getting stronger and more intent on conquering Fisher's home. And then Everlane, Fisher's younger sister, arrives, and she is enthralled to the vampire king Malcolm, the man who kept Kingfisher imprisoned for over a century. And it appears that he was not alone in creating this plan. It's far more insidious than it originally was assumed to be. The question is, will anyone survive? And if so, what changes will victory bring? I have very good reason for being vague, as I truly don't want to spoil the book, and to go any further with the story would do exactly that. So now I've given you a rundown of the core of the novel, without spoilers, of course. What did other readers think of it? Katia seemingly loathed the book, though from her review she did at least finish it. She gave it 1 star and said, "This is terrible. There is no way anyone with a developed prefrontal cortex can enjoy this unless you're into dumb dialogues and even dumber MCs. Don't get me wrong, the start is great. The idea and the world in which this is set is actually quite interesting. But as with many books in this genre, our independent, self-sufficient and strong FMC turns into a useless, horny buffoon when she meets her eventual love interest. The MMC? You're telling me that you're 1,000 plus years old and you talk and act like a moody teenager in his emo stage? What grown-ass woman finds that attractive? Also, dear authors, respectfully, please don't gaslight the readers about the MCs being funny. It doesn't work. Just write funny scenes and dialogue to make us laugh. Don't write cringy jokes and quips that are not funny at all, and then have the side characters finding the MC hilarious, as if that's going to make us think the joke was good. The FMC was making dreadful comebacks throughout, which would have her be laughed out of a high school cafeteria, let alone in an adult setting. It makes sense that this book is recommended for readers 17 plus, not because of trigger warnings or violence, but because the dialogue is on a level of 15 to 18-year-olds. I had to scroll through quite a number of DNF reviews before I found one that showed the reviewer had finished it before posting her feelings. I still think that you shouldn't rate a book if you haven't finished it, but the feedback that I have received indicates I am in the minority with this particular opinion. Of course, people are entitled to feel how they want to feel about a book, but many readers who give it, or gave this one in particular 1 to 1.5 stars, seem to not even reach the 50% mark before quitting. Admittedly, I have read a number of books and DNF'd them over the last 2 years, not that many though, but I left them unrated while posting why I didn't finish them. Personally, I think that's the best route, but that's me, because I have still struggled and finished books that I rated as low as 0.25 stars. See the video I posted of my highs and lows for 2024 to find out more about that one. It does seem as though some fantasy reviewers find a genre or subgenre they don't enjoy and post similar reviews across them all, because I swear I came across this particular review for Fourth Wing. I'm convinced everyone is being held at gunpoint rating this 5 stars. I'm not going to roast someone for having an opinion, because I know for a fact reviews for pretty much every book range quite well between 1 and 5 stars across every platform. Even Pride and Prejudice has been rated 1 star by people who didn't enjoy it, though I have yet to do much research into the lower ratings for that particular book on my favourites list. On Goodreads, the overall rating for Quicksilver is 4.44, which is pretty good when you take into account the number of low ratings I have just had to read through. On Storygraph, it's actually a tiny bit lower at 4.37, but truthfully, that's still a pretty good score when you consider others I have seen for books that I personally would rate higher. Quicksilver was originally independently published by Callie Hart in June 2024. It was then purchased by Hodder Stoughton in the UK and Forever in the US, and released in hardback and audio in December 2024. I have no doubt that there were changes made and edits done between these 2 publication dates. all of which means that anyone who reviewed the original copy and struggled will not have seen what it could become with a publishing house editing team working on it. Does that mean that their ratings and opinions would be any different? Possibly, but then the book could just not be for them. Since its first release in June 2024, the book has garnered an impressive number of reviews and ratings across Storygraph and Goodreads, and Amazon as well. Though for now, I am going to stick with my focus on Goodreads. While Storygraph is growing, it's still a small potatoes platform in comparison. At present, Quicksilver has 198,076 ratings and 26,367 written reviews. Out of that pool, 87% or 175,540 readers gave it a positive 4 or 5-star rating, while at the other end of the spectrum, less than 2% or 4,955 reviewers didn't enjoy Quicksilver and gave it a 1 or 2-star rating. As seems to be the case more often now, especially on Goodreads, a mysterious 3% of readers either didn't rate the book or have strangely been excluded from the overall review and ratings number. Maybe they do need to add in a DNF or 0 stars option. Charity enjoyed the book so much that she wrote 2 reviews of her experience. As I don't have an endless amount of time and ultimately I do want to talk about my own opinion and feelings on the book, I'm going with her abridged review. She gave it 5 stars, saying, "I wanted to remember this in the years to come. When I looked back at this moment, I would be glad that I'd taken the leap and jumped. This was the kiss to end all kisses, demanding, urgent and carnal. I hated this male, hated him with every fibre of my being, but curse me, I wanted him just as bad." Another day, another popular fantasy romance book was reviewed. I do have to say, after reading Quicksilver by Callie Hart, I get why. This was a fresh breath of fresh air, because it was different when it comes to Fae. I can easily say that it is one of my favourite fantasy reads of 2024. My only real complaint is that it just dragged a little in areas where I wonder if it could have been edited out. But all in all, it was good and I wouldn't change a thing. As you are reading, the world is starting to unfold and reveal itself to you, which makes this fantasy book easier to digest when it comes to world building. As the main character sees it, so do you. But I do see more potential for the world to unfold because throughout the story, it is revealed there is a lot going on. I really loved the dry humour banter from Fisher to Sare-iss. It was fun, and I really loved the dynamic between them throughout the story. I would say they did come together a little too quickly, where it felt a little insta-lovey, but the way it unfolded made sense, and I was here for their relationship from the very beginning. There's no denying it. Especially when I look at my overall reading list from 2024, I have been reading a lot of fantasy over the last 12 months or 366 days or however you look at it. That's likely not going to change with 2 of my most anticipated reads for 2025 being additions to existing series that I have enjoyed, especially the climax to Hannah Kaner's Fallen Gods trilogy. This year, I am going to attempt to expand on my reading options, and my 25 chosen books for 2025 are hopefully enough to indicate it's not going to be all about the fantasy. Anyway, this book is fantasy and apparently gained a lot of popularity on TikTok, a platform that I have barely looked at in around 6 months. I know that many new people have joined and there is still concern that it's going to be banned in the US, but it's not one that I have chosen to get my reading recommendations from for many reasons. I have to be honest though, I purchased this copy of Quicksilver because I saw the cover and the sprayed edges and thought that it would be a nice addition to the purple section of the special editions shelf. So, what was the book like beneath the purple sprayed edges, end papers, and embossed naked hardcover? Now I've told you about other people's views. Let's get down to it. Here are my thoughts on Quicksilver by Callie Hart. Completely spoiler-free and 100% honest. Did I like the book? This was another book that made it into the Goodreads Choice Awards and didn't win. Though to be fair, for those who tend to read mostly traditionally published novels, it would have only hit their shelves towards the end of the year, the beginning of December, and I know that I wasn't going to vote for a book that I hadn't yet read. But less about that. I could probably harp on about the lack of good judgment used when it comes to those awards. And in the years I have been voting, it's rare that anything I enjoy actually wins. Okay, I have to state this right from the start, my disclaimer, because otherwise this could colour my review in an unfair light. I do not have a great history with fantasy novels where the core characters are from the Fae world. You know, I struggled incredibly with ACOTAR and gave up after taking more than 6 months to finish A Court of Mist and Fury. Unlike many others who love this series, I did not like Feyre. I found Rysand dull and annoying and incessantly repetitive, and after pushing through the almost 1,050 pages of the first 2 books, I knew that I didn't care enough about their story to continue on. I am fully aware that I am the exception, not the rule when it comes to how I feel about this particular well-loved series. Of course, I didn't want to judge my rather meh opinion of fae-focused fantasy solely on this particular couple of books, because that wouldn't be fair. So I have read others and I will be talking about those later. I was incredibly cautious when it came to Quicksilver because of the storyline and the plot and the characters and everything else, especially the Fae aspect. I had seen a few positive reviews as well as several negative ones, all from people in the book reviewing realm that I respect. So I knew I would have to dip a toe in just to justify purchasing my copy, especially as I had already stated that I was going to try and make my way through more of my existing TBR this year, as well as buying new. So after finishing Orbital on the first of the year, yes, this review has taken a bit of time to reach you, I picked up Quicksilver and soon found myself wondering what on earth I had got myself into. It was difficult not to see pretty immediate similarities to other fantasy novels, but if I only ever read different, then I would find my reading choices incredibly limited. We have the human girl who is the sole supporter of her household, in this case her younger and less sensible brother Hayden. I get the feeling that we will either find out he died in the second book or he will have a bigger part to play. Sare-iss is daring, courageous, and a little bit stupid, stealing something she knows is going to bring trouble down on her and her loved ones, as well as the people in her district who are already the perfect victims of their queen's almost constant wrath. And of course, as the female main character, she is not like other girls. In this case, her difference is that she is an alchemist, and the most powerful one we have ever known, though she doesn't realise this until she is told by our main male character. Once our love interest is introduced, because we know he's going to be the love interest despite the fact that she claims to hate him from the moment he appears on the page, Sare-iss is given a nickname. Osha, or Butterfly when translated into the human tongue. Pretty nickname if you ask me, but feels weird coming from someone who spends most of his time growling, yelling and glaring at her. As is often, or rather more normally the case with a romantasy, the growls and grunts hide the fact that he's incredibly attracted to her, and the relationship, once it turns sexual in nature, is not so much about consent as it is about what I want. As a teen, before the days of Me Too and personal awareness of abusive and imbalanced relationships, I would have probably been all swoony about Kingfisher, the broody, dark-eyed fae warrior with lots of secrets, including one that seriously affects Sare-iss directly. As the blurb says, secrets have a way of getting out, and these do, exploding pretty catastrophically. But Sare-iss, despite being angry, still seems to be strangely obsessed, concentrating on Fisher, as though she can't stop thinking about him. She's sort of like a young teenager staring at posters on her bedroom wall. She has been witness to what Kingfisher is capable of. She has seen the power he wields and the destruction he can cause, yet nothing ultimately stops her from declaring her hatred for him and then jumping into his bed at pretty much the first Okay, let me be a little bit more generous here. Second, maybe, opportunity. While Sare-iss could be considered a pretty good judge of character, especially when it comes to people like Ren, Everlane, and Lorith, and to a degree the unwanted arrival from Zilverin in the form of her one-time lover Carrion Swift, she shows zero judgment with Kingfisher, as though her brain doesn't work properly when she's around him. I found this particular element of their relationship irritating, though it wasn't quite a case of insta-love as many referred to it in their reviews. It's pretty darn close. I also don't think that I would call this enemies to lovers, if only because what enmity exists between them is somewhat weak and lukewarm. Kingfisher is possessive, obsessive, and other characteristics that I don't think are all that healthy in a relationship. But to be fair to him, Sare-iss isn't that much better. In their bedroom encounters, neither of them are exactly gentle or loving. It's explosive and sort of toxic. So while they are meant to be and probably could be considered endgame, it's not the sort of relationship anyone should be aspiring to. Do you hear that, younger readers? Do not aspire to be like Fisher and Saeris. All of that having been said, and here I am trying to keep this as PG as I possibly can, the scenes between them are pretty explosive, but questionable at the same time. I don't think I would be too happy with some of the things that he says and the way he acts when he wants to show he's the one in control. There are 3 or 4 scenes in the book, but they are a little later than I have come to expect, hence my feeling that it may be a case of instant attraction, but there are no speedy declarations of love and devotion, which is a refreshing change. For me, as with a lot of books, it's the secondary characters who make the story. Everyone from the sarcastic Carrion Swift who can't help but rub salt in the wound that was his failed one-nighter with Sare-iss, to Lorith, the man who shares a soul with Kingfisher and grows to be a good friend to her. Everyone is brilliantly rounded out and has unique characteristics that make you want to learn more about them, which you do as part of the world building. I even fell a little bit in love with Onyx, the winter fox, who initially shows his distaste for being disturbed by biting a nice chunk out of Sare-iss's arm, but eventually becomes her loyal companion. I'm also relieved that the world building we are presented with is well-rounded. Everything that we read about has a reason, whether it's the story behind the closing of the portals between Avelia and the other realms, or the motive behind the battles that are going on. The villains aren't just cardboard cutouts who yell at each other. There is a point to their anger and a purpose behind their fight. Queen Madra, Malcolm, and King Bellicon are irrational, evil, and powerful, yet they aren't just names on the page. They have stories and emotions, and while I don't like them as characters, I had a reason to dislike them that wasn't just they're here to be hated. That element in stories is something that I really don't enjoy, so I was pleased to see it wasn't repeated in Quicksilver. Of course, while I enjoyed the book, I am not oblivious to its faults, which is why it's not a 5-star read. But I do think that the world building and the end of the book, which I will not be spoiling, provide a strong enough foundation for the sequel, which is going to be released on the 16th of October 2025, or at least it is according to the Waterstones website. The rights to the book have also been purchased by Netflix, which is looking to make a mini-series from it. More detail is currently unavailable, but it's as though they're following in the footsteps of Amazon, Sony and Hulu, who have been on a bit of a fantasy buying spree themselves and have the rights to Fourth Wing, From Blood and Ash, and A Court of Thorns and Roses, respectively. Would I recommend Quicksilver? Yes, I think it was an enjoyable jaunt through a new world with interesting characters and a complex but not too intricate plot. The relationship is a tad toxic, but that seems to be the case with so many romantasy and fantasy books these days that it's harder to find one where this isn't the case. Themes that make the book. For a book that seems as though it would contain a lot of complicated themes, it's rather simple when broken down into smaller pieces. Loyalty and allegiance. Loyalty is a fluid and precarious concept, often tested by circumstance and survival. Sare-iss operates in a world where allegiances are transactional and trust is rarely given freely, because betrayal is a constant in a place where it can be the difference between life and death. Her theft of the gauntlet, a seemingly small act, sets off a chain reaction of shifting allegiances that sets her understanding of loyalty. Kingfisher's role in Saeris' life add complexity to this theme. He saves her life by dragging her through a portal between worlds, a significant act of loyalty despite their differences or the fact that he didn't even know who she was. This bond forces Saeris to confront her own fractured sense of allegiance, not just to Kingfisher, but to her own slightly bent and twisted moral compass. The story probes the tension between self-preservation and general commitment to others. For Kingfisher, loyalty is not just an obligation, but a driving force behind everything, rooted in a sense of honour and duty. In contrast, Sare-iss often navigates loyalty as a survival mechanism, making their evolving relationship a compelling exploration of how allegiance can shift from necessity to choice. The tension between their personal desires and their obligations to larger factions or the ideologies they have been brought up with creates an environment where their loyalty is constantly questioned and tested. As Sare-iss is drawn deeper into Kingfisher's world and the conflicts in it, she has to decide whether to align herself with him and what he believes fully, or to move away from it. Survival and sacrifice. Survival is a necessity in Quicksilver, while sacrifice becomes the inevitable price of staying alive. Sare-iss' theft of the gauntlet is a desperate act, driven by her need to survive in a world that offers her few options, other than the ones that her mother took, becoming a prostitute, when she had no other choice. However, it sets her on a path where survival is no longer just about evading the consequences of her own actions. It becomes a matter of navigating dangerous political and magical forces beyond her control. Kingfisher's intervention in saving her life symbolizes the ultimate act of sacrifice. His action reflects the deep cost of survival, not just for himself, but for Sare-iss, who is now bound to a destiny she did not choose. The act of saving Sare-iss is not without consequences for Kingfisher, as it ties him to a volatile force in her that could endanger his world and his people. As the story unfolds, they are both pushed to their limits, forced to decide what they are willing to sacrifice, not just for their survival, but for each other. Sare-iss' growth as a character is marked by her gradual acceptance that survival often requires more than cunning. It demands vulnerability, as well as opening herself up to trust those who have given her little to no reason to. This theme highlights the delicate balance between self-preservation and the willingness to give up something precious, whether it be freedom, power, or relationships, to secure a future worth fighting for. So, now I've talked about that, have you read the book? If so, what did you think of it? If you're looking for something like this, or you loved this and want something else, then maybe these are an option. There are so many fantasy novels I could recommend if you were looking for something about dragons or mythology or voyages of adventure around the world. But stories about Fae, as I have already mentioned a few times and I've been completely upfront and honest about, are not something that I am great at finding for myself and then enjoying. Having said that, I have spoken with friends who have absolutely loved the books that I discovered weren't for me. So I'm going to go with their instincts and recommend the books I didn't enjoy, but they did. Because when it comes to books, opinions are incredibly personal. And for everyone like me, there is someone the complete opposite. Whether I liked it or not, the Court of Thorns and Roses series is an incredibly popular one. The first book was released in 2015 and the sixth book has just been announced, with a release date of either late 2025 or early 2026. At a current length of over 2,700 pages, there's a lot to enjoy, and if you love reimagined Beauty and the Beast type stories, then this one could be for you. Another book with a sequel due for release this year is Feybound by Sara Al-Arifi. The sequel, Cursebound, comes out in a few days on the 13th of February and looks as though it will be as full of Fey politics, love and conflict as the previous one. If you fancy a book with characters who are a little older, then the Fever series by Karen Marie Moning could be for you. There are currently 11 books in the series, with the most recent one having been released in 2021, so in all likelihood there will be more at a later date. If you have any books you think should be on this list and aren't, then please let me know. We're now a good few weeks into the new year, or we will be by the time this episode airs, so I hope that you're having a great one so far. I am working my way, slowly but surely, through my 25 chosen books for 2025, as well as various other books that have hit my shelves. I want to make sure that I'm reading different genres, broadening my horizons a tad, so that I have more to talk about than the latest fantasy. That said, the next episode will likely be about Onyx Storm, the third in the Empyrean series, unless another book yells that much louder. Do you have any interesting books on your TBR for this year that you want to share? My TBR of new books is already building quite nicely. There are a considerable number of books coming out in the next few months, and in January I added quite a few to the shelves, which meant I needed to do several shelf resorts. Yay! Well, that's it for this week, and thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, why not share it with your friends and family, and please post a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of the other podcatchers where you might listen. It really does help build outreach for the podcast. You can follow me on Instagram as Being Bookish Pod, on X as Being_Bookish, and Blue Sky as Being Bookish. You can also find many of these episodes and video content on my YouTube channel, Ray Loves Reading, which can be found using the tag @BeingBookishPod. Or if you prefer to read everything, you can find some spoiler-free reviews and my 2025 reading tracker, plus all these links on my website, beingbookish.co.uk. Until next time, this is me saying farewell.